Hello everyone, my name is Jesse Maurer and I'm the Worship and Creative Arts Pastor here at Maple City Chapel. And I want to welcome you to today's edition of the Maple City Podcast. During today's conversation, Dr. Jay Shetler, Senior Pastor here at Maple City, will be sitting down with Ryan Graham, our Executive Pastor, and Kyla Whetstone, Executive Assistant, to discuss the topic of our 2025 Mental Health Initiative. Let's join the conversation now. Here's Pastor Jay.
Well, I am super excited about this. We've been talking about doing this for a long time, and here we are.
Here we are.
Kind of hard to believe, actually. This is Ryan Graham and Kyla Whetstone, and Ryan is our executive pastor. Kyla is our executive assistant, and we're going to talk some about mental health in this podcast today. We're kicking off a sermon series coming up, and so we're going to get into that in a little bit. But just a time to kind of focus on mental health and what that means, and looking forward to talking. You guys have been in the kind of the heart of it as we've been talking through this stuff. And so I can't think of two people I'd rather sit down and have this conversation with. So
thanks, Jay.
Glad we're here.
Yeah, happy to be here.
That's great.
It's exciting. It's kind of the culmination of a lot of things that we've had in the back burner, but now it's like more formalized and we're able to kind of flesh it out together as a staff and as a church. So excited to be here and talk about that today.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And we have, we talked earlier about, in the year, this mental health grant. And so I want to say a little bit about that, just to remind people about the mental health grant that we got. $40,000 from the Center for Congregational Care. And they're an organization that gives grants and resources. What other projects have we had them help us out? Do you remember other?
Our HR project.
HR project.
Yeah, they helped us totally overhaul our HR department and write all of our handbooks and all that good stuff. So
they're an amazing organization. I mean, they're funded by Lilly, which is based in Indiana, and they provided, I think it was 30 churches this year with a mental health grant. And so we were lucky enough to get one of those grants, and so we're spending some time throughout the year just focusing on mental health. We did a survey to start the year out, and that was interesting. We haven't really shared some of those results with the congregation yet, so looking forward to getting into that. We've done some stuff with the staff in terms of mental health training with Tanya Whelan, who's a therapist locally. Curious to get your impressions. What do you think so far about the stuff we've done with Tanya?
Yeah, I've been loving it. One thing that's really interesting about our staff is that we've always kind of had this thread of wanting to do things together that make ourselves better. I don't know if you remember several years ago when we would do our monthly staff challenges.
Yep.
So oftentimes they would be focused on physical health or relational health or something like that. And there's just always been this desire as a staff to push each other to grow, to be better, to improve our health, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, all that stuff. So it's been really exciting to have Tanya come in and kind of work with us through some of the different mental health aspects and everything. So it's a fun way to grow together and work as a team.
I love it. That's one of the things I love most about our staff, because we take on these different challenges. Last year,
right?
It was last year, right, that we did the physical health?
2 years.
2 years ago?
2023.
We had a health coach come in and focus on our physical health, and that was really powerful. I know you lost like 300 pounds or something like that.
Like 40, yeah.
40.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. I think it's kind of like anything really with the mental health. It's all, like anytime somebody goes into an environment where you're with a therapist or something like that, like we all have these like preconceived notions or soundtracks, like we talk about them around here. And for this in particular, for our staff, I think it's the same thing. Like everyone is kind of going into it with their own assumptions, and it is just kind of, you get what you put into it. It's interesting, it's challenging. In a lot of ways, it's really rewarding. But I love that most of the staff, and I think just about everybody, has been jumping in, is embracing that value we have of keep growing, and we're just willing to say, okay, let's see what God has for us, and if it can help us be healthier and be better leaders, then sign us up.
I love, Tanya works in my counseling office. I'm going to interview here down the road as one of the podcasts that we're doing. So, but one of the things I love about the way she works is it's not just sit and talk or lecture, but she gets you to move around and gets you out of your comfort zone a little bit.
I definitely expected this last one to be more sit and hear her lecture, and then we're just like up pretending to climb a ladder and all the good things. So that was a surprise for sure. She makes it fun.
And, yep.
Go ahead.
I would say we're hoping to get the church involved. Well, we will be getting the church involved down the road in some of these initiatives. We have some training specifically for our volunteers who work with kids and students. And then we'll have one that's really geared toward the whole church and just helping us all be more informed about mental health and how to interact with each other when it comes to mental health. We have this podcast that's part of this. So that's pretty cool. Another initiative that we want to get off the ground is when we were looking at some of the mental health needs in our community and what resources are lacking, marriage kept coming up, that it's hard to find marriage counselors, it's hard to afford marriage counseling. And so we're wanting to do a training with some volunteers to just put together some mentors, people who can, if someone is going through a marriage crisis, they can be there and help care for married people. So I'm excited about that. I think that providing that kind of help will be a great thing for us as a church. And then we have this sermon series as well. Something we're kicking off in this podcast is in part to help introduce the different topics that come up along the way. So yeah, I'm curious, what do you guys think about this emphasis on mental health this year and how that might impact us as a church?
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I think that mental health now more than ever is being talked about. It's being highlighted. A lot of people are expressing their pathways with it, how it's been for them. And so it just is a really important time for people to be able to have a place to learn about different elements of it. I'm really excited about the different topics that you have coming up in our mental health series and just how they will touch on so many different aspects of mental health and different demographics of people who maybe have struggled with it and stuff like that. So I think it's just a really, really important topic for us to dive into. And I'm excited to see the stories that come from it, see how people grow, see what God does in me personally over the next year as we dive into this. So,
Yeah, I think what excites me most about it is it goes back to a conversation, Jay, that we had maybe a year or two ago, maybe even 3 at this point, about how important mental health, spiritual health, relational health, and physical health are, like, individually, but then how they push and pull on each other. When one's out of whack, it affects the others, and making sure that we're looking at things through the right lens. Not everything is just a spiritual problem or a mental health problem or et cetera, and just being able to look at those things as individuals and then recognize how they affect the rest of your body and that holy and wholeness that you talk about. I think you explain it a lot better than I do, but I go back to that conversation every time I think about this. And to me, that's what elevates it to be more important, because when one of those is off, the rest is off, and it can make you feel really out of balance and lost and confused. But when you start to understand that, no, this is an effect of this larger thing, to me, it kind of centers me a little bit and helps me go, okay, I'm not as messed up as I thought I was. I just need to put in some work in the right spot and trust that God's going to help bring me through that.
Yeah. It's those 4 you mentioned, I go back to a lot, and I think part of it is that all of us can relate. Like, we all have relational struggles, and we all have emotional and physical. We're humans, and it's one of the things that just connects us, is that we will have those struggles along the way.
Yeah.
So.
Jay, I'd love to hear a little bit from you about why mental health is so important to you personally. I know that you speak on that a lot. So what are you excited about with it coming up?
Yeah, maybe I'll even go back.
Yeah.
When I first graduated from college, I went into psychology and ended up going to Fuller Seminary, specifically because they integrated theology and psychology. They were one of the few places at the time. There's quite a few places now that do that, but the idea there was to put together kind of biblical studies and psychology. And I don't know, just from the beginning, that was just very intriguing to me. I loved people and trying to figure out people, and I think the Bible has a lot to say about people and the human condition, and psychology does too. And I think in many ways they just reinforce each other and go hand in hand. So that was an early interest and passion of mine, and came out of there with my psychology degree and spent time with a psychology private practice, but was involved in the church as an elder and some things like that. And then 13 years ago came on staff as pastor. And so it kind of flipped, but both were still there the whole time. I just love taking those two worlds, bringing them together. part of how I explain is I think the Bible often gives us the why, and psychology sometimes gives us the how. And so the Bible has a lot to say about forgiveness and the importance of forgiveness. Psychology has a lot to tell us about what does forgiveness look like? How do we accomplish that? And so I think they can just go hand in hand with each other. And definitely as I've talked about it more and more from the front of the church, there's more and more people who are like, wow, this is like, it's so practical, like the different ways that the Bible speaks to these issues, and people walk away, I think, really feeling like there's something that they take away from that topic.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, one thing that I feel is really unique about you is that combination of the psychology background while also being in your pastoral role. So I love when we get into sermon series that are kind of shaped around that. I always say that is when Jay is in his wheelhouse, is when he can really explain the psychology behind it while also bringing in these important biblical principles and explaining who Jesus is, and then also just weaving it all in with how he's created our minds and our bodies and the way that we act in that way. So like recently we did our Holy and Whole sermon series where we really talked a lot about the differences and how we integrate mental health in that. So, and that's a phrase that you tend to use a lot, is holy and whole. So do you want to go into that a little bit, explaining what we mean there?
Yep. I have long sleeves on, but I've got that tattooed on my arm.
Right,
It means that much to me. But it's kind of, it comes from 1 Thessalonians 5:23. There's a verse there that says, may God himself, the God who makes everything holy and whole, make you holy and whole. Put you together, spirit, soul, and body, and keep you fit for the coming of our Master, Jesus Christ. And I love that idea of, and we talked about this in that series. We're made up of parts, and you talked about those four different parts. And God designed us that way. And all those parts, according to Scripture, are broken. Like that, we're flawed. We're all broken physically, emotionally, spiritually, and we need redemption. And so when you bring the psychology and the theology together, you get that picture of broken humans, these different parts. And it's exciting to me to see the way the Bible speaks to those different parts, the way psychology speaks to those different parts. And I think we get into trouble when we don't recognize those parts. I grew up probably more in an era where psychology was looked at quite suspiciously in the church. And so a lot of, whether it was depression, anxiety, were defined more as spiritual problems. And the more if something is defined as a spiritual problem, then it requires a spiritual solution. So the solutions were often, we'll just pray harder or things like that, and then it should take care of itself. And it just doesn't work that way. And so I love that we have, I think, a more nuanced view in the church now. At least that's what I hope where we're getting to, is a more nuanced view of mental health in the church. And my heart beats around seeing people find healing and wholeness in those different areas. And it's fun to be a part of a church that really puts an emphasis on that.
Did you ever experience that yourself, like when you're growing up or interacting with the church, where you were having times of mental health struggles or anything else that you feel like were maybe the spiritual remedy wasn't quite the one that made sense to you, or that you've been able to kind of unpack as now that you're 10 years past or whatever? And
yeah, that's a great question. I think I was probably shaped more around that in my psychology practice. Like I would have people come to me after going first to a pastor or something like that, and sharing their psychological struggle and feeling like it was just minimized or somehow, or it was dismissed, or it was defined as sin if they would just confess. And so then they went to a counselor to try to get help because it felt like it wasn't help there. So I probably come in with some bias that sometimes we as a church, we just don't do as well as we should at recognizing mental health stuff, defining it as that, and providing the resources that people need. There were some people along the way, and I think we have people in our church that are drawn to our church because of this, but people who've been wounded by the church because of the response to mental health stuff. And I see it every once in a while. We had a situation not that long ago where someone was pretty clearly, I would say, struggling from some pretty severe mental illness of a family member, but it was seen as more of this is like sin that's got to be confessed and it should all go away. So I love that we can just talk about it. I love we can just put this out in the open, talk about it, and hopefully all learn together and grow together.
There's probably a lot of guilt that comes too when people feel like, oh, it's something that I'm not praying hard enough, or I'm not relying on God hard enough, or I'm not confessing the things that I need to confess. So how would you walk with people through that when they feel like, oh, I'm I'm not getting better, even though I'm doing all these
Right.
things. All the things that I should be doing in
Yeah.
order to.
We talked about shoulding on Sunday.
Yep.
Right?
You might want to define that.
When we say should statements a lot,
Yeah.
it just leads to guilt. I should be this. One of the reasons I can tell that the stigma is changing a little bit in the church is, I would say, early on when people would come in pretty regularly, like when they would talk about being on medication, being diagnosed with mental health, being in counseling, there would be kind of like this, shame look that would come over them, and they would kind of admit it, feeling like, I know I should probably be seeing a counselor. I shouldn't be on if I had enough faith, it's that kind of stuff. So I don't get that nearly as much as I used to. And so I think that's good. I think it's showing that culture is shifting a little bit in the church, and I think outside of the church too. And so, yeah. And so some of it is just taking that shame away, just giving people permission to, I often will tell people, third year of our marriage, we struggled a lot. We went and saw a marriage counselor. Beth's given me permission to talk about this. She talks about it quite a bit, but she struggled with depression early on in our marriage quite a bit, and the effect that had on her, on us as a couple. She's started taking medication years and years ago for that, and that's been extremely helpful for her. So it's also something personal, something that we've walked with. I would say that I struggle with anxiety from time to time. Usually hits me about 2 a.m., 4 a.m., and I can't go back to sleep, worrying about my kids in California. So this is an area that, for most people, it touches either them personally or someone in their family.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys can identify with that at all or not in terms of the personal experience of it, but
Yeah, I have definitely struggled with anxiety. I especially remember I have 2 kids, and it always felt like after I would have a baby, the world would get so much scarier again, and it was a big dose of anxiety that came for several months there in the postpartum stage. But definitely have had my own walk with anxiety with people in my family. It's pretty hereditary for us, so it's definitely something that I have struggled with and that I've talked to you about a lot, and being in this environment has really helped. So that's part of the reason why I'm so stoked about this whole mental health series, is because it's so personal and can be so personal for so many people too. So
can I ask out of curiosity, what's helped you the most with that journey with anxiety?
Talking through it, really. I found that things are much scarier when you don't give them a voice. So it's like the constant thoughts of what if. But just like I've done this with my husband a lot too, of I need to tell you the things that are on my mind because I have to get them out. Like I just need to say them so that I can have more control, more power over them. So that's a big part of it. And then also, like Tanya, when she was just in the other day, talked a lot about what's here and what's now, because anxiety is so what if focused, and what if this happens down the road, but instead it's grounding yourself and thinking, okay, what is happening right here and what is happening right now. So those have been my 2 biggest things.
Yeah, and it totally makes sense. When I think of anxiety, I always think of what if. My brain is asking what if. And when you add kids, those are some of the most valuable things you'll ever have in your life. And so what if something goes wrong? I mean, it produces anxiety.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I remember with our kids, when Michael and Hannah, Michael especially, he'd cry and we'd be stressed. What if something's seriously wrong? He's crying, and then he would stop crying and be quiet for several hours, and what if he's dead? What if, there's always a what if question that you can fill the space with. So
I was definitely checking on my kids, holding my finger below their nose
all the time.
They're a week old, and I mean, they're just doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're breathing and eating. That's it, and sleeping. But it wasn't enough just to trust it. I
still remember that when Beth and I got engaged. The very next day, she went up to get something out of her apartment. She did this a million times while we were dating. I sat in the car and almost had a panic attack.
Yeah.
Is she okay? Is she not? And the only thing that changed is we got engaged. And so somehow that switched something in my mind where, the what if questions just got bigger and more powerful in that moment.
They really do. I remember a conversation you and I had that really helped me with this. And it's a lot of what you were saying with Tanya about being here and now. But just looking at these scenarios I have with my kids and thinking through, okay, let's play that out. Say that does happen. what do we have to say to God about the life we have lived and all these experiences we have had? Because we don't get to take those away. And those future things, like, they haven't been given to us yet, but to really be here and now and understand how thankful we are, and to be able to stand in this moment and say, like, God, I've had a really full life. I've had a really full relationship with my kids so far. And that's really stuck to me and been something that's helped me navigate those times where I'm starting to get a little bit more overwhelmed, or thinking through, watching my kindergartner walk into school for the first time, worried, are they going to be bullied? And you just learn to trust the Lord. But another thing that I appreciated about that conversation was that we've created a really safe space to even have that conversation to begin with. I know that's something I feel fortunate to be a part of Maple City staff, that we can have those conversations. And it's not just with you, it's with each other. And I know that's been a pretty important value for you for a long time.
I love that. I think the more we can just be all open and vulnerable, and I learned along the way with, talking about my own shortcomings and struggles. I think early on there was fear that, someone will lose respect for me if I share, and it just really opens the door for other people to be vulnerable. And I remember that conversation, because that I kind of forgot about that, but there was a point in my life where I was super anxious about dying. I was worried I was going to get a car accident. That was the thing. So I'd be driving and I just had this anxiety. And somewhere along the way, I read or heard someone talk about, when we think of dying like that, it's all, what am I going to miss out on? My daughter's wedding, my son's, whatever. Like, we think of the future, and instead he said, draw a line today. And if you've lived life the way you want to live it, like, you're going to look back and you're going to be like, I am so blessed. Like, the relationships I've had, like, I will say to my family now, like, I have lived a more fulfilling life. I have experienced things. If I died today, like, I would be so happy with the life that I've lived up to this point. And it just switched my mindset from thinking about the future and what if, to focusing on, if I died today, you couldn't take away all these experiences I've had in the past. Those are set. Those are with me forever. And you can't. So it's that shift that really made a difference to me in my own journey there.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with that too. And I think when my anxiety is at its best, it reminds me to be so grateful and so thankful, because what at the core, what my anxiety is I could lose any of this at any time. And so it's a reminder of how grateful am I that I have things like this that would be hard to lose. And so it's like, when I'm afraid of what if instead I can be like, God, thank you for these things that you've given me, and help me to steward it well, and help me to make the best of it. So in a way, it's important to view our anxiety as a helpful tool sometimes too.
Absolutely. I love that you said that. And I look forward to Tanya's, I think, going to help us unpack this a lot. But anxiety, all emotions are not negative things. And anxiety can be a super helpful thing. It'd be kind of like if you didn't experience any physical pain, you wouldn't live very long. It's there for a reason. You don't want to walk around in pain all the time, but it's a gift. Pain is a gift. And anxiety is much the same way. It's a gift. And if you can, one of the things that I've over the years tried to do is, instead of the what if, even if. And so even if this happens, even if, God is there, God will be faithful. And, my own spiritual walk has been all about, every day, how do I trust God more? Like, what does it look like for me to trust God more? And that's my spiritual kind of journey or challenge. Yeah. I'd love to throw a question to you guys. Like, we're in different generations. I do think there is a little bit difference, both in terms of people willing to acknowledge mental health and get treatment and the stigma around it. I'm curious what your experience has been growing up in the church. Like, have you experienced much stigma around mental health? And, like, do you feel like you can talk about it openly? And
I don't think that I've experienced tons of stigma around it. In fact, it feels like my generation is very, very open about talking about it in a way where everybody has something, right? Like, you get on social media or on Instagram or TikTok, and everybody's diagnosing themselves with OCD or with anxiety or with stuff like that. So it feels like people are very, very, very aware of it, and they also need some more education on what to do with it, or what these symptoms actually are, because it's so much more. Mental health is so much more than just feeling happy, but it's all about like creating resilience and how to serve well and how to take care of yourself well so that you can come to a place where you are serving well. So I think my generation, we're very open to talking about it. And I also think that we could always use more education on it, and what does it look like and how do we live it out in our daily lives.
Yeah, that's good.
I'm somewhere in the middle, I think. Like, my generation is the internet came right as we were growing up. And so in a lot of ways, I feel separated on both sides. I went from playing outside to like playing online. And in something like this, it's like we went from not really seeing it to, like you said, everyone has something. And so we're trying to figure out, well, if everyone has something, well, that's just called normal. Then, but also, like, no, these are serious things. So I think a lot of people, even me included, in this millennial period, is just kind of looking at things like we don't know enough about it, but we don't necessarily want to jump straight into it. But we're like, the conversation's wide open. We don't really feel shame about talking about it and understanding it. We're just trying to figure out how does this actually fit into a worldview, and when do I really need to get help?
Yeah.
And we just kind of want a safe space to unpack that and not be judged for not just fully jumping in on every single new thing that turns up every day.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting discussion. Like, every generation, there's ebbs and flows with stuff, and I think mental health is a great example. I think the older generation is like, you don't talk about it, and I would say this generation is like, you talk about it all the time, and there's real benefits to talking about it all the time, because it takes away the shame and the stigma, but then it can be like most mental health symptoms are normal to an extent. Anxiety isn't sadness, like they're normal emotions, and it's only when they reach a certain level that they become diagnosable. And so if we all just diagnose ourselves every time we feel worried or sad about something, then we kind of lose out on what is normal. Like, it's normal. Human beings experience these different emotions at different times. So
what do you hope for? Like, you asked us the question, how do you see us interacting in the same church? Like, what do you want for our church in terms of how are we going to talk about this? What are we going to do? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. To me, part of the win is just talking about it. And this is true. We've talked about issues like women in ministry or different things like that are controversial in the church. I think the first step is just talk about it. Like, if we can't talk about it, then we get stuck. And so this is one of those areas where part of why we're doing a summer series around it and putting this emphasis in is just to give people permission to talk about it. There's actually some studies that show churches that talk about mental health even once a year, it changes the mental health dynamics in the church. Like, there's just an openness to it. And I do think that we as leaders, if we're willing to get up and be vulnerable and talk about things, it really does give permission for people to be real. And my experience in psychology would say the only way you have a chance to change is if you're open to talking about things and being vulnerable and sharing things. That's kind of a prerequisite. So that's at a foundation level. My hope is that we continue, because I think we've done this at some degree already around lots of things. It's not just mental health, but we want to give the church permission to be real human beings.
Yeah.
And that means that we acknowledge we struggle with stuff. And
so what do you say to the person who says, okay, I hear you, I'm just not ready to talk about it? What do you say to them?
That's fine. I mean, I really do think that, again, part of in a counseling environment would be people are defensive or not ready to talk about certain things for a reason, and maybe they're just not ready, and that's okay. If you push someone too hard and they're not ready, it can actually go badly. And so, and it's the same with like sin in our lives. There's times where I'm just not ready to deal with that. I know I need to, but and so the Holy Spirit's got work to do to get us to a point where we're ready to do that. And I definitely want people to have permission to talk about it, but also permission not to talk about it if it feels like it's something that they're not ready to deal with in that sense.
Yeah. We're going to be doing a lot of talking about it here in the coming weeks with our Not Alone series we have coming up. Do you want to share a little bit about the different topics that we're going to dive into? Yeah,
I'm really excited about some of these different topics that we're going to hit. It's going to be an overview, really just introducing the series, and then one of the first topics we're jumping into is technology. It's kind of a debated issue, but there's more and more research that says that technology plays a role in mental health. I'm actually curious what you guys think about that. Again, you're from a younger generation that was more, you mentioned you're kind of in that in between, but you grew up immersed in technology.
Yeah, pretty well immersed in it.
Do you think technology plays a role in it?
Definitely. I am a big proponent of saying technology is an issue, and we need to make sure that we have the right boundaries and control over it, or it will control us. And I think a lot of the issue is just that social media is such a highlight reel of your life. Like, you're posting your high points, your good moments, and then it's just so easy for people to compare themselves to that. So you compare your worst moments to everybody else's best moments. And I think that is a huge thing that has really done some damage to mental health in my generation and the generation younger than me, of this constant comparison. And I just don't think that maybe we were meant to see everybody in this light. I don't think that the Lord really intended us to see everybody else's highlight reel without seeing what they're going through.
Yeah, it would be interesting to start a social media platform where you just show your lowest, your worst selfies,
pictures
and your
when you're
lowest
crying,
moment when your kids are fighting.
Yeah.
I agree. I think it's like a universal experience when you say, hey, I went on a technology fast, and they'll say, how do you feel? And I just feel better, or I feel lighter, and you don't have to unpack it. Like, we just know innately what that means. And there's something about technology and like Instagram and some of those apps in particular, where when you're only seeing the best, it just doesn't line up with how you understand the world. And like, you can make it super spiritual and like go back to the garden and say God created everything good, and that's great, but we had the fall, and the world is broken because of what mankind has done to it with sin in the world. And so we can look at these like perfect things, and we just know like innately that's just not reality. And it just doesn't really fill us. It doesn't feel right. And there's something about breaking from that. And I think maybe going into what you said, just embracing the truth, like, yeah, it's kind of messy. Mentally, physically, spiritually, relationally, like, it's just really, really messy. And for whatever reason, I feel more comfortable in that than I do this other thing, which is why I don't regret that giving up technology, I re-enter the real world that is broken. That feels more sustainable to me and comforting, and like there's a way forward than I ever do feeling living in this world of reels and just constant highlights.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to unpacking it, because I do think there's a number of, you mentioned social comparison. That's a big part of it. There's a whole part of it that's just with mobile technology. I'll date myself, but going back to when phones were something that hung on walls or something like that, like you left the house, you were unreachable. Like, you didn't, you just couldn't, you just knew that, well, they weren't home, leave a voicemail or something. But now you're constantly available, and that takes away natural rhythms of rest and downtimes because of mobile technology. So there's so many different parts of it that I think will be fun to dig into. So technology is a big one. We're going to talk about depression, anxiety, trauma. We're going to jump in with church trauma as well. Mentioned before that I think one of the things that we try to do here, at least, is be a safe place for people who've had hurt in the past from churches, and it's part of our push to be a healthy church. We're not a perfect church for sure, but we don't want to cause additional harm or trauma to people who've been hurt or traumatized before. So we're going to hear from Cami Schwartz, who attends here. Cami is your sister.
She's my sister.
Do you want to say a little about what she does professionally?
Yes, Cami is a birth doula and a reproductive health doula. So she works with women who are trying to get pregnant, who are pregnant, or who are postpartum, and just as their labor coach during labor, that she can be there to support them. And then she also just does a lot of work with them ahead of time to prepare their hearts and their minds for labor and for the transition into motherhood. She actually has her psychology degree as well. That's what she attended college for. So she has a really, really interesting brain that mixes kind of those two things of this like biological, this is what your body is doing side with this is what your brain is doing, and this is what the Lord is saying. Like, she does a really, really good job of walking with women through all of those really tender times. So I'm really, really excited to hear from her.
Yeah, and Cami sits on our sermon planning team, and so behind the scenes, she's been for a long time now doing quite a bit of. She does research. I love her insights, like you said, on the body and theological, and she just did a devotional that's fantastic. So listened to that at 2 a.m. when I couldn't sleep this morning.
To the meditation, that was really good.
So she's going to be, all that to say, she's preaching on Mother's Day and talking some about women's issues as it relates to mental health. So I'm really super excited about that. And then we're going to end the series on Father's Day and talk about men's issues as it relates to mental health. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun to do that. We're going to be doing some podcasts along the way. I mentioned Tanya Whelan, hopefully talking to her, and then getting just some stories from real people who are wrestling with mental health and how they made their way through it. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
Should be good. As we're wrapping up, any other thoughts or comments about this topic and the series and what you're excited about?
I just want to say thank you for diving into this with us. Ryan has talked before about how your psychology mixed with pastoral brain is your superpower, and I just think that is so true, that we're just lucky that we can hear from you and hear from your brain. And so I just want to say thanks for taking the time to really dive into this and making this accessible. I'm so excited for what it will do for people inside our church, people outside our church, just the trainings that the people are going to be able to experience, that then we can go and we can be better disciples of Jesus. So I think that this is going to be a huge year for our church, just in learning more, being more resourced, better educated, and so that we can continue to just go out. So thank you for the work that you've done on this.
Well, thank you. And I love what you said there, because I do think, like, when I think of mental health, that's the other huge opportunity for us as a church, is that this is a topic that everyone is talking about.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. We have more therapists, more medication, more of resources available, and yet we have more and more people struggling. And I think part of that is we have more and more people who really are lonely or just lack general social support or the meaning that comes from faith. And so I think we as a church have a huge opportunity to step in and provide community and provide resources. I sometimes bounce back and forth. I think there's times when we can too quickly reduce things as spiritual when they're not. They're psychological or mental health. But there are some super important spiritual resources that we have available. There's tons of research that says prayer matters. Like, prayer can make a difference. Believing in God, having faith. Like, there's all kinds of spiritual resources that do make a difference when it comes to mental health. And so we as a church really have this opportunity to provide help, practical help to people who are struggling right now. So super excited.
Yeah.
Any final words, Ryan?
Man, I think you said it. I'm just excited. I love that. I really think this is going to be approachable for people. I think this is going to be like the way we talk about it, like you said. Ready or not, everywhere in between, there's going to be a place for you to come and to sit and to take it in. And when you're ready, take those next steps. And I just hope that we all feel the encouragement from each other to borrow a little bit of courage and just say, hey, like, I'm ready to dive in and have the conversation and trust that this really is a safe space. I believe that it is, and I'm excited for what the ripple effect of that is as people learn how to walk through this in a way that we believe is the way God says is healthy.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for joining us for our first ever podcast here. This has been fun. And if you're watching, invite someone to this mental health series that's coming up, and share this with someone you know who may benefit from it. Thanks for watching.
Well, thanks again for joining us for today's episode of the Maple City Podcast. You can watch for more episodes coming out on the Maple City Chapel app, and you can also find more information about our church, the events going on, the resources available to you. You can also join us on Sunday mornings at 8:30, 10, and 11:30. We hope to see you there. Until then, let's go and be the church.